I'm Dennis Jers. I'm teaching a course on Pittsburgh native playwright August Wilson at Seton Hill University. And I'm here to talk about Act 2 of Gem of the Ocean. Now, Wilson knew that he wanted to write a play set in each decade of the 20th century, but he did not write them in order. And this is one of the last plays that he wrote, but chronologically it happens first. It's set in 1904. That's when the older generation had clear memories of surviving slavery, but the younger generation was still coming to terms with what it meant to be free. At the end of Act 1, Aunt Esther has sent Citizen Barlow on a quest that starts with finding 2 pennies. And though he's taking it very seriously, Esther, at the end of Act 1, told Black Mary that the pennies are just a distraction to keep him from wallowing in his own guilt. Now, Wilson is clearly showing that Aunt Esther isn't using mystical powers. He's showing us behind the curtain, but she still has a huge impact on Citizen. You know, her powers are not fake, but they're just not what Citizen seems to think they are. Anyway, Aunt Esther, the character, is mentioned in some of his other plays, but Wilson's plays do not tell a coherent story about a single family across the generations. It's much more diverse than that. Okay, so Act 2, Scene 1 begins the next morning. Selig is filling Black Mary in on the community reaction to the fire. This is after crowds of black people have been objecting to injustice. Selig has heard reports that some whites were saying they'd be willing to go to war again to reinstate slavery. And they're talking about wanting to bring in the army to restore order if the local police can't. Anyway, Eli then arrives with an update. The fire is still burning, and someone saw who started it. Selig is delivering more stones for the wall that Eli is building. But the scene really gets going when Citizen returns from his quest. Now, he's only partly successful. He found the 2 pennies, but he didn't meet the man that Esther sent him out to meet. But it doesn't really seem to matter to Esther. She tells him to get ready. He's obviously ready, even if he hasn't completely fulfilled the ritual. And now the ritual starts actually in scene 2. The beginning of scene 2 kind of stretches that out. Scene 1 ends with the anticipation of the ritual, and then scene 2 begins with the supporting characters, Black Mary, Eli, and Sully, updating us on their own story arcs. And I'll let you read that scene for yourself. We get to the ritual pretty quickly. It's really an absolutely stunning monologue where Aunt Esther takes Citizen Barlow on a mystical journey. It's really an experience. It's a ritualistic, hypnotic experience for a Citizen. It's a visit to the City of Bones, which is a mystical city made up of the bones of Africans who died on their journey from Africa to America on a slave ship. And this mystical concept of this passage, the ritual passage, it's not something that August Wilson invented, though I'm not suggesting that he's just sort of like documenting and presenting an historical folk practice that was just handed in his lap. He's telling a fictional story, and to tell that story, he's using characters who tell stories. And those characters exaggerate when they tell stories. And when we understand that Aunt Esther is kind of tricking Citizen for his own good, so we should accept Wilson's story as his own creative work, not a factual account, but he's doing it for the sake of having an effect on us, just as Aunt Esther is doing something for the sake of having an effect. This experience is based on a common experience of Black Americans whose lives were personally and directly touched by slavery. Esther sets up this ritual by which Citizen Barlow faces and sort of re-encounters the trauma of his ancestors being ripped from their land in Africa, and for many of them being ripped away from their transplanted completely. I mean, these ancestors they may never have heard another human being speak in their native tongue again, because people were pulled from all over different parts of Africa as part of the slave trade. In a similar way, though Citizen was born into freedom, when we meet him, just as his ancestors were torn from Africa, he's kind of wandering around lost in the north. He's not part of the southern agrarian culture, the farming-based culture that the older characters remember. So this experience of being torn from Africa and shipped as property to be auctioned in America, it's a common experience that Wilson wanted his modern audiences to encounter. Wilson felt that American blacks who ignored their heritage were denying themselves an important part of their culture and ignoring this shared trauma, sort of turning their backs on, not wanting to think about plantation culture and not wanting to think about African culture. Wilson saw that as a cause of social ills in the generations that really tried to separate themselves from their heritage. Now, I'm telling you this stuff not because you're supposed to write it down because there's going to be a quiz. I just want to emphasize that the ritual that we see in Act 2, it's not made up nonsense. We're not just supposed to be sort of passively watching an occult ritual, for fun, by creating a character named Citizen and sending Citizen to get his soul washed by a ritual created by Aunt Esther. Wilson is inviting, or maybe that's not the right word, forcing everyone in the audience to witness and participate in and share in this and co-create this experience. It's not something that the characters on stage are just watching passively, like a streaming video that you can pause and ignore. It's something that's happening to these characters, and we're watching it happen. If we're fortunate enough to see this in a live theater production, we're watching it happen right there. So you have to use your imagination, and you have to create this image in your head as you read the script in order to understand what Wilson is doing here. Okay, so this process of being kidnapped inland, typically by other Africans, often as prisoners of war, and sold in port cities to European slave traders, that was known as the First Passage. And the Middle Passage is the long journey on the Atlantic, and the slaves were often shackled in the holds of cargo ships, along with other victims. As they were sort of, struggling to speak each other's languages, they learned to communicate by rhythm and chant and sort of non-verbal vocalizations, forming this community as they dealt with their grief from being ripped away from everything that they knew. The final passage was the journey from the auction block in America to whatever plantations where they would be, living out the rest of their enslaved lives. So those three passages, Wilson didn't invent them. I mean, this is part of African American cultural heritage. But it was in this, during the Middle Passage, many slaves died or committed suicide during this sort of hopeless period. And it was on one of those Middle Passages that the slaves on the Spanish slave trader La Amistad got the chance to rise up against their captors, and that was the event commemorated in the date and the address 1839 Wiley, as I mentioned in the previous lecture. But Aunt Esther's monologue, it's rich and complex and poetic, and I could do a whole lecture just on this scene. I remember as a college student learning that Christians in various denominations and time periods over the years actively blamed and persecuted the Jews for the crucifixion of Christ. And this surprised me, as an American, grew up in the late 20th century Catholic. I grew up every Palm Sunday participating in a ritual that's it's really like a play. I mean, you'd have a little bulletin that have your parts in it, and the priest would take the role of Jesus and read Jesus's lines, and various other lay people would read the lines of other characters. And the congregation standing there in their pews holding the programs, we would deliver the lines that the crowd was supposed to deliver. Lines like "Crucify him," when the Roman leader asks the people, "What do you want me to do with the Jesus guy?" I was conscious of my participation as a Catholic standing there in the pew, participating in this play and saying, "Crucify him." It was me and my brothers and sisters there in the church who were calling out, in a ritual, in a play, but we were enacting this desire to crucify our Lord. And every year, that ritual, that little play, drove home the message that I crucified Christ, and that we did it every year. There I was in the crowd, not literally, of course. I knew even as a kid that we were role-playing. But still, as a member of the human family, it was my sins that Christ died for. He did it for me. So this Christian church uses this play ritual to teach children, and adults too, an important religious message. I mean, certainly the nativity plays with little kids dressing up as Mary and Joseph and shepherds and sheep and so forth. The Christmas pageant is designed to teach and enact and help us understand this important ritual that we need to know for our salvation, for our spiritual well-being. August Wilson attended Catholic school as a kid. He would have been very familiar with these same rituals that I was just talking about. Now, this play shows Aunt Esther acting out a ritual of her own. And Eli, Solly, and Black Mary help her. I mean, they've clearly done this before. They know their parts. Just when you look at this part of the play, watch how they follow her cues and they improvise. Esther knows Solly well, and she probably knows fully well that Solly carries around a lucky iron chain link. So when she points out that Citizen was supposed to come back with an iron link that somebody else was supposed to give him, well, Solly just happens to have an iron link on hand. Esther probably knew that. Solly knows this ritual. At one point, Esther asks Citizen, "What about the people?" The Citizen is kind of hypnotized in describing these visions. And Esther says, "What about the people?" And Citizen says, I don't see no people. And she tells him, "Look close." And a couple lines later, suddenly Citizen can see the people. She's feeding him suggestions, and he's taking her suggestions, and they're improvising. But like I said, the other characters have done this before, and they know it works. This is why the people out there say, go see Aunt Esther. So if you look at what's happening kind of realistically, Esther is convinced Citizen that she has some special powers. He feels so guilty for his crime, and if you've read the play, you know what the crime is, but you haven't read it yet. I don't want to spoil it for you. But he feels so guilty that he's just ready to do just about anything. As a Catholic, if I'm guilty, I know what I'm supposed to do. I go to the sacrament of reconciliation. I give my confession, I do my penance, and my soul is healed. That's what I need to do. I know my church tells me these are the rituals I'm supposed to do to put my soul right. If I've damaged my community by sinning, I have to make reparations, apologize, and so forth, and get right with my community and get right with God. Now, we know that in this play, there are several references to churches in the area. The African American communities in America were very much focused around the church as a social organizing factor. But Esther's rituals are a way to connect Citizen. He's a freeborn American. They're connecting Citizen with the African traditions that he himself is separated from. He's isolated from. And at the end of this ritual, we, the audience, have also been transformed. We know we're watching actors pretending to role play for the benefit of another character who needs something, who needs the magic, who needs to believe in something. Yet I'm hoping, even if you just read it on page, it's pretty intense if you just think about it as poetry. read it out loud, or if you can, if you're ever fortunate enough to watch something like this scene is a showstopper. Now, and true to August Wilson's great storytelling sense of timing, we're still reeling from watching this transition in Citizen and watching the impact on him, and we're still just recovering ourselves from watching this great experience that Citizen has gone through. When there's a knock at the door, Eli has his ritual, this a peaceful house response, but Caesar bursts in again. And, if you haven't read the play, I don't want to spoil it, but Caesar comes in. Well, notice who else in this room is harboring guilt. It's not just Citizen who's harboring guilt. And also pay attention to what role Sully's stick plays in the action at this point. I've mentioned his stick a couple times. And what did Sully say about the stick when he first showed it to Citizen? Take a look at that. Why is it important to him? And while we're talking about Sully, what has he been trying to do in this play? I haven't talked about him much. He has his own character arc. He has something that he wants to do, that he feels like he's got a mission. He was headed out on that mission, but stopped by and stuck around to help with Citizen's ritual. And that leads to the next plot development that I just alluded to when Caesar arrives. Scene 3, we see the extent to which this experience has changed Citizen. He's got a heartfelt monologue about a woman from his past, and he's talking to Black Mary. And he and Black Mary, I'm sure they're still attracted to each other. But if you look at the dialogue here, they are relating to each other as people with relationships, not just relationships with each other. They're not just sexual appetites. Citizen is thinking of himself now as a whole person with relationships that matter. And Black Mary at this point says, you got to be right with yourself before you can be right with anybody else. Their relationship is much more mature now. It's not all about seduction and conquest and power. They are relating to each other as people, and it's really interesting to see this exchange. Now, it's strange in this scene. We've just seen Esther in this commanding presence, this powerful performance, but she's in this scene, she's nagging and she's pushing Black Mary around a little bit. She's back to being a fussy old lady who's hard to please. But and Black Mary, she really pushes Black Mary too far, and Black Mary snaps at her. And this scene, scene 3, Esther has an exit line. That if you think about the exit line that Esther has at the end of the prologue, and the effect that her line has on Citizen, I'm pretty sure that line would have a similar effect on Black Mary. Anyway, look at that scene for yourself. You could see for yourself what Wilson is doing here. Black Mary needed this scene in order for her to be ready to play her role in the climax. We'll look at that when we get there. We're not that far away. Scene 4, I'm not going to say that much about scene 4. It's a confrontation. It's kind of a classic confrontation scene, ramping things up as Caesar really flexes his muscles against Aunt Esther. And this is, it's a good, powerful scene. Scene 5, we see more of the consequences of Caesar's actions. And Black Mary fulfills the role that Aunt Esther prepared her for. And then at scene 5, pay attention to what happens to Sully's stick. I know, for the record, I'm totally uninterested in hearing what you think happened next after this last scene, after the play ends. Wilson ended the play when he ended the play. And there's no assignment in my class where I'm going to ask you to write fan fiction, scene 6, act 2, what happened next. This isn't a creative writing class. It's not a language arts class. That's just not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in us studying August Wilson's words. And so let's take a look at that ending. The stage direction mentions a few props, and just at the beginning of my previous lecture, I mentioned the importance of the lamp in the prologue. Wilson goes out of his way to mention quite a few props at the end of Act 2, the end of the play. And the fact that he mentions those props and how the various characters interact with them, we know what those props are for because we've already seen the characters talk about them. I haven't mentioned all of them, but if you've read the play, you'll recognize what I'm talking about. So I think the play ends at the right time. We know what these props mean, and we can figure out what's going to happen next. Now, there is so much more to explore in this play, but, I already know what I think about this play. And when I teach these plays, I'm not interested in dumping all my thoughts into my students' heads. I want my students to practice reading literature for themselves. And so that's why in this lecture, I've left out big chunks in the hopes that you can practice, stitching those pieces together and making those original connections that I ask my students to make. And I'm asking you to stitch them together with textual evidence. That is, look at the lines in the play and look at the stage directions. I'm not asking you to stitch these together with what you feel should happen or what Schmoop says happens. I'm hoping that you're going to look at the script itself and let Wilson's words do their magic on you, because really that's the whole point of literature. So what did you think? There's plenty else to talk about that I didn't bring up. What is there to talk about? What did I rush through? In my last lecture, I said Sully was in his 70s, but right there in the script it actually says he's 67. So I was wrong there. Where else have I been wrong? I'm far from an expert in August Wilson. I'm thrilled to be sharing this journey with my students. And I hope you'll tell me what you think about this play. Just connect it to August Wilson's words and let those words do their magic for you. Okay, so for special topics in American literature, August Wilson at Seton Hill University, Dennis Jers, and I'm wishing you happy reading, and I hope to see your thoughts online.